Mr. Steele's laughter still rang in my ears when I walked into the boardroom with grease on my sleeves and a trembling boy behind me. "You're invisible around here, Joe," he'd sneered not 2 hours earlier, grinning to an audience of managers who delighted in pretending they didn't see the women who kept their quotas alive. Invisible. The men around the table sat up when they noticed Samuel, clutching my hand. He was pale, small for 10, and stubbornly straight-backed the way his mother had been when she didn't want to ask for help. He didn't look at the suits. He looked at the folder in my other hand, the black one that had lived in my locker for months because I wasn't brave enough to open it, the one with Franklin Caldwell's name pressed in neat gold letters. I placed the folder at the center of the table and slid it forward. "This stays with the boy," I said, voice steady. "For Franklin Caldwell's wishes." Mr. Steele snorted. "And why would a Caldwell leave anything to us, Ms. Fletcher? This is a parts factory, not a fairy tale." "Because," I said, tapping the embossed seal, "he owned more of this plant than you do, and he left his stake in a deed that transfers control to Samuel Caldwell upon presentation." The room went silent, phones stilled, pens froze midair. Even the ventilation hum felt like it held its breath. Mr. Steele's jaw clicked as he laughed, brittle. "A child? You brought a child into a business meeting with, what, some thrift store papers?" "Not thrift store," I said. "County recorded, witnessed, certified." I turned to Samuel, his eyes searching. Mine, hunger still tightening his cheeks from the days he'd gone without. "This is yours," I told him softly. "Your grandfather left this to protect you. To protect what's right." Samuel swallowed. He nodded once, small but fierce. I put the folder in his hands, and the room, a room that had called me invisible, froze itself into silence so complete even Mr. Steele's smile couldn't stand. And that was the day Clayton, Michigan finally saw me. Now let me tell you how we got here. I've worked at the Clayton Components plant for 22 years. If you've ever driven past it, you've seen the corrugated metal roofs that cup snow like powdered sugar, and the red brick admin building trying too hard to look modern with its mirrored glass. Inside, it smells like oil and machine heat, like routine, and sore feet. My name is Joanne Fletcher, Joe to the ones who've known me long enough to earn the right, and I've learned more about machines than most men care to admit. By the time the newbies are done calling me ma'am and miss, they've learned that a quiet woman who knows every sound a faulty press makes is more useful than a loud man who shows up late with a necktie and an opinion. Or, at least that's what I believed until Mr. Gregory Steele arrived, the kind of manager who holds his latte like it's a weapon and leans on words like synergy and optics. He liked clean lines and tidy reports and floors that gleamed. He didn't like seeing me in budgets or hearing me in meetings. He didn't like seeing me at all. That morning he'd called a staff huddle to announce efficiency, restructuring. That's boss slang for, "We'll cut people who cost less than our carpet." He stood at the front and smirked at me, eyes sliding past as if I were a shadow on a factory wall. "Some of us," he said lightly, "are practically invisible when it comes to value add." A few chuckles, a few averted eyes, the kind of laugh people do when they're scared. I stared at the floor, swallowed the burn, and kept my pen steady. I've learned a lot about steadiness. I went back to line C with the humiliation sitting cold in my stomach. By lunch, I couldn't swallow food, couldn't untangle the knot of angry words that never sound the same once you say them out loud to a man who enjoys watching you twist. So I did what I always do when the noise is too loud. Took my sandwich outside and walked the long way around the shipping lot. That's where I saw him. Behind the loading dock, in the wedge of shadow where pallets get stacked and forgotten, a boy crouched with his arms wrapped around himself. He had a backpack that was more straps than fabric, a bruised yellow jacket, and eyes that didn't ask for anything because asking costs hope. "Hey," I said softly. "You all right, honey?" He stiffened, like a stray taught to expect a boot before a hand. From the corner of the dock, a tabby lifted its head, copper brown, scrappy, watching me with that precise feline suspicion. The cat flicked its ear and pressed itself against the boy's knee like it had memorized loneliness and decided to be stubborn about it. The tag on its collar was a flattened bottle cap with the name Rusty scratched on it in a child's scrawl. The boy's voice was small but stubborn. "We're fine. I crouched, ignoring the protest in my knees. "I'm Joe," I said. "This is company property, but I don't mind you sitting here. You hungry?" He tried to say no. His stomach said otherwise, loud and human. I cut the sandwich in half and pretended I always bring extra. "What's your name?" He hesitated. "Samuel." "Something? old and tender, pulled tight inside me. Samuel, what? Another hesitation. Like a cliff he wasn't sure he could jump. Caldwell. I sat down slowly, as if lightning had cracked the sky and I needed to hear it finish. Caldwell. Franklin Caldwell's surname, etched into the neat gold letters on a folder that had lived too long in my locker. A folder I'd never opened all the way because stories like that don't happen in places like this. Or so I told myself. I put the sandwich in his hand. Rusty nudged his elbow and got a pinch of crust for his loyalty. Samuel chewed like the bread hurt his mouth from being too dry for too long. Where's your mom, Samuel? I asked gently. He looked away. She's not here. And your dad? He took another bite. Didn't answer. I recognized the silence. It had my daughter's shape. Emily had always had that same straight-line quiet when life felt unfair, and she didn't want anyone to witness her breaking. Do you have somewhere to sleep? I asked. He swallowed. He calculated how much truth was safe. Sometimes. Do you know who Franklin Caldwell is? I asked, heart in my throat, voice even. Samuel blinked. He was my grandpa. He died. I exhaled like a tired tire finally letting go of air. I reached into my bag and felt the slick surface of the black folder. I didn't take it out. Not yet. Not out here in the wind. Okay, I said. Finish your sandwich and come with me. He stiffened again. I'm not going to the police. I'm not either, I said. I'm going to the shift office to sign out. Then we're going to get you warm food that isn't from a vending machine. He glanced down at Rusty. The cat yawned, unbothered like only cats can be in the middle of earthquakes. Rusty, too, Samuel mumbled. A test. A small boy's line in the dirt. Rusty, too, I promised. That afternoon, while the machines pounded their rhythm and Mr. Steele held court about invisible value, I took Samuel to Maddie's diner, a warm place with coffee that never empties, and meatloaf that forgives you. He ate everything. He ate like he was memorizing what enough felt like. Rusty stretched out on the vinyl booth beside Samuel, copper fur catching the afternoon light. The waitress, Denise, who'd known me since high school, raised an eyebrow but brought a saucer of milk without comment. Small towns are good that way sometimes. They know when to ask and when to wait. When Samuel finished, I put my hand on the black folder and finally flipped it open. It held what I knew it held. Franklin's signature, notarized and firm, county stamps, a letter addressed to the Caldwell child of Emily's line. Words so careful they trembled. Is that for me? Samuel asked, eyes on the paper but hands staying in his lap like he'd learned not to reach. It is, I said. Your grandfather left something that could change everything. He looked at me with a kind of apologetic courage that adults rarely manage. It won't bring my mom back. No, I said, but it might bring you home. I'd first met Franklin Caldwell 15 years ago when he came to inspect the plant, an old-school businessman with a spine like rebar and eyes that measured your worth by how you treated the, cleaning staff. We weren't friends, not really, but we recognized something in each other. He was the kind of man who remembers your name, even when you're not in the room to hear it. Joe, he'd said once, most folks think power sits in corner offices. But real power? It's in knowing which gears turn which wheels. He'd tapped his temple. And when to throw a wrench in 'em. 7 months ago, he'd stopped by the factory and asked for me by name. We sat in the break room with coffee that tasted like tin while he told me, without quite saying it, that he was getting old. Paper is how we protect futures, he said, tapping the black folder he carried. But paper needs a person with a spine to carry it. He left that folder with me and made me promise to keep it safe. When the child needs it, you'll know, he said. I thought he was being dramatic. I didn't think I'd ever see the child again. You see, Franklin's grandson came through my daughter, Emily. My Emily, with her laugh like summer rain and a mind that couldn't sit still. She'd fallen for Nathan Caldwell, Franklin's grandson, when they were both too young and too sure. When Emily told me she was pregnant, she cried like she'd done something unforgivable. I held her face in my hands and told her that love never arrives on schedule, and the only honest thing to do with it is to make room. Samuel was born with a furrow between his eyebrows that made him look serious even when he slept. He had my mother's hands. But there are holes in this part of the story. There are things I'll be ready to say someday. Not yet. What I will say is that Emily and I didn't speak for a long stretch of years, a silence too complicated to tuck into a simple sentence. Pride is expensive. So is pain. So is the way time passes when you're both waiting for the other to call first. Now here was Samuel, looking at a folder his grandfather had entrusted to me. A woman who'd lost her own daughter to silence and misunderstanding. What does it say? Samuel asked, voice small. I slid the letter toward him. If you're reading this, I'm gone, I read aloud. If you're holding this, it's because a decent person put it back in the hands it belongs to. This deed gives you controlling interest in Clayton Components through the stake I bought 30 years ago to protect the town that raised me. You won't understand it now. You don't need to. Just know that this is your shield and it was earned by people who worked with clean hands. The room blurred. I blinked hard. Does that mean I own part of the factory? Samuel asked, bewildered. It means, I said, choosing my words carefully, that your grandfather made sure you would never be without a voice. He left you something that even Mr. Steele can't take away. Who's Mr. Steele? Man who thinks some people are invisible. Samuel nodded like he understood exactly what that meant. People like us. Yes, I said. People like us. Outside, the factory belched steam against a winter sky. Inside, Rusty put his chin on Samuel's knee and purred like a small engine that refused to stall. Invisible, my boss had said. We'd see. To understand why I had Franklin's deed, you have to. No, Emily. My girl was born with a spine like a plumb line. Straight. True. She laughed with her whole body when she was little, then learned not to when school taught her that joy is inconvenient in small towns where everyone is broke and tired. I married young and married wrong. Fletcher was his last name, but it wasn't the kind of name you keep for love. He left when Emily was 5. I learned. To stretch paychecks until they squeaked and fix leaky faucets with cussedness and tape. I learned you can work yourself to the bone and still be told to smile more. We did all right, Emily and me. We had our routines. Friday night pizza with whatever toppings were on sale. Saturday morning cartoons where I'd fall asleep on the couch while she watched. Sunday afternoons at the library where heat was free and stories were better than the ones playing out in our neighborhood. Emily met Nathan Caldwell when she was 20. His father was a Caldwell, but not Franklin. Franklin was Nathan's grandfather. Old school, buttoned up, the kind of man who shakes your hand and looks you in the eye like he's checking the fit of your soul. He had money, but he treated work like a sacrament. He loved things, numbers, and what numbers could build for people. When Emily told me she was pregnant, Nathan stood behind her with a hand on her shoulder that looked more like a claim than a comfort. We're going to make this work, he said, with the confidence of someone who'd never had to make anything work in his life. I wanted to tell him that babies don't follow business plans. I wanted to warn Emily that love isn't enough when pride gets in the way. But I just pulled my daughter close and said we'd figure it out. That's what mothers do. We make room for the futures our children choose, even when we can see the cracks in the foundation. Samuel was born in spring, when the air smells like possibility and the light stretches longer into evening. Nathan lasted until fall. He loved Samuel, I think, but he loved the idea of success more. When a job offer came from Chicago, he packed his ambition and his cologne and left my daughter with a baby and half-written promises. Emily moved in with me for a while, then found a small apartment where the radiator clanked all night, but the windows caught good light for her plants. She worked 2 jobs, daytime at a dentist's office filing insurance claims, evenings at a call center where she could bring Samuel and let him sleep in a portable crib next to her desk. I watched him on weekends, those precious hours when we'd sit on my porch and I'd tell him stories about brave cats and kind dragons and people who kept their word. The Caldwells, complicated people. Franklin sent a note when Samuel was born, not flowers. Congratulations. Build him a good name. I kept the note in my Bible with the programs from funerals and the prayer card Padre Miguel gave me when Emily moved out for good. Franklin would stop by sometimes. Awkward visits where he'd bring a toy that was too expensive and ask questions that were too careful. Emily tolerated him because she understood family is more than DNA. It's the people who show up even when they don't know what to say. Then came the argument. I don't remember how it started. Something small, like most devastations. A comment about Nathan. A suggestion that maybe Emily should reach out, try again for Samuel's sake. Words like knives. You never thought I was enough on my own. You don't know what it's like to raise a child alone. Maybe if you'd tried harder with Dad. We both said things that can't be taken back. Emily took Samuel and left, and the silence between us grew like a wall, brick by brick, month by month. I tried calling. I sent cards on birthdays. I left casseroles on her doorstep when I knew she was working double shifts. But pride is a poisonous thing, and we both had swallowed too much of it. Then one winter day, Franklin showed up at the factory. He looked older, frailer, but his eyes were still sharp as tacks. We sat in the break room with coffee that tasted like tin, and he told me, without quite saying it, that he was getting old. "Paper is how we protect futures," he said, tapping a file he carried. "But paper needs a person with a spine to carry it." He left that black folder with me and made me promise to keep it safe. "When the child needs it, you'll, No," he said. I thought he was being dramatic. I didn't think I'd ever see the child again. 2 months later, Franklin died. Heart attack in his sleep, according to the obituary. I went to the funeral but stood at the back, unsure if Emily would want me there. I didn't see her. I didn't see Samuel. The minister spoke about dignity and legacy and heaven, but all I could think was that Franklin had known something was coming. He'd prepared in the only way he knew how, with paper and trust. Years passed. I worked. I learned to swallow jokes that weren't funny. I learned which managers cared more about floors than people. Then Mr. Steele arrived, and the plant got shinier and meaner. Safety talks got longer, breaks got shorter. The words we used to talk about work got bigger and more meaningless. On Tuesday, he stood in front of my station and said, "We're streamlining. I need team leads who motivate, not mother." The way he said mother. On Thursday, I found Samuel behind the dock with Rusty. And on Friday, I took the folder out of my locker and walked into Human Resources to ask where our shareholder records were kept. People asked me if everything was all right. I said I was fine. I said the weather was turning. I said words that sounded normal because sometimes normal is a mask you wear, so no one tries to take your courage away. Now, sitting across from Samuel in my small living room, with Rusty curled between us on the couch like a furry connector, I felt the weight of all those years of silence. Samuel had my mother's hands, but he had Emily's eyes. Clear, unflinching, taking in more than they gave away. "Did you know my mom?" he asked, voice careful. "I did," I said. "She was my daughter." His eyes widened, piecing together the puzzle. "You're my grandmother?" "I am." "Why didn't she ever talk about you?" The question cut clean as a new blade. "Sometimes," I said, choosing words like stepping stones across a rushing creek. "People who love each. Others still hurt each other. And sometimes it's hard to find the way back." "She didn't come back," Samuel said, matter of fact. "The landlord said we had to leave. She said she'd be back with money, but she didn't come back." My heart stalled. When was this? 3 weeks ago. I stayed as long as I could, but then they locked the door. "And you've been... where?" He shrugged. That heartbreaking, adult gesture in a child's body. "Around, different places. Rusty helps me find good spots." I swallowed the panic rising in my throat. Where was Emily? Why hadn't she come for her son? "Have you heard from your mom at all?" She texted. Said she was trying to find work in Detroit. Said she'd send for me. His voice was steady, but his fingers twisted the hem of his jacket. "I think her phone died." Or something. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Something was wrong. Emily might have been angry with me, but she would never leave Samuel. Never. "You can stay here," I said finally, "for as long as you need." "What about Rusty?" The cat lifted his head at his name, yellow eyes narrowing in that way cats have of judging your intentions. "Rusty too," I said. "We're family." The word hung in the air between us, fragile and powerful all at once. Family. The one Emily and I had broken. The one Samuel had lost. The one we might, if we were brave enough, begin to rebuild. "Tomorrow," I said, "we're going to figure out what your grandfather left you. And then we're going to find your mom." Samuel nodded, solemn as a judge. "She'll be mad that I lost her backpack." "No," I said, certain of this if nothing else. "She'll just be glad you're safe." That night, I made up the spare bed with clean sheets that smelled of lavender and sunshine. I found an old t-shirt of mine for Samuel to sleep in and put a bowl of water on the floor for Rusty. As I tucked Samuel in, he reached out and touched my wrist, his fingers light as butterfly wings. "Grandma?" he said, testing the word. "Yes?" "Thank you for seeing me." The simplicity of it nearly broke me. I leaned down and kissed his forehead, breathing in the scent of him. Soap and boy and that indefinable something that meant he was mine. "I've always seen you," I whispered, "even when you weren't there to see." Once you decide to stop being invisible, people notice. Not because they finally see you, but because your silence stops, doing them favors. First, I called Clayton County Records. The deed was real. The stake was real. The transfer conditions were precise. Upon the death of Franklin Caldwell, controlling interest in Clayton components would pass to his named heir, a grandchild of his blood through the Caldwell line, with a temporary custodial trustee authorized if that heir was under legal age. The trustee? Named in confidence by Franklin with the county. I was afraid to hope. I was even more afraid not to. Second, I brought Samuel to the plant manager's office because I wanted help connecting him with services. Food, housing, school, anything immediate while I pieced together the inheritance. Mr. Steele turned that into a show. "Ms. Fletcher," he said loudly from behind his glass wall, "we are not a shelter. We're a factory that builds parts so people can build lives," I said, keeping my voice even. "We have a responsibility to the town." He smirked and swept his hand toward the line. "Our responsibility is to output. Not your charity cases, not some stray kid and his cat." Samuel stood behind me, shoulders squared, eyes hard. Rusty sat at his heel, tail tip flicking like a live wire. A few line. Workers watched from the corner of their eyes. Mr. Steele made sure they saw him send me away. "Back to your station, Ms. Fletcher, and take your mascot with you." That afternoon, security told me my locker had been randomly inspected. The black folder was still there, thanks be, but my pay stub was missing. "Policy," they said. I signed an incident report I didn't agree with to keep my job while I bought Samuel a warm coat from the thrift store with cash and counted out quarters for soup to stretch a Friday into Monday. When a man senses you won't break, he tries to bend everything around you. Mr. Steele started assigning me to the worst shifts, closing followed by opening, schedules that made sleep a hobby, not a necessity. "We all make sacrifices," he said pointedly, loud enough for the line to hear. I saw what he was doing. He wanted me tired enough to quit or foolish enough to snap. He wanted the factory to agree with him when he said I was a problem. He didn't plan for Rusty. The cat began to sleep in a cardboard box near the time clock, so line workers started leaving trimmings of ham and lidded bowls of water. "Union rep with whiskers," Manny said, scratching Rusty between the ears. Every morning, Samuel came around the side of the building before school hours and tucked a blanket into Rusty's box like a ritual, then disappeared again to whatever borrowed couch he'd found for the night. "One day at a time," I told Samuel. "We hold on. We do the next right thing." He nodded like he'd been doing that his whole life. Meanwhile, I pressed county records for the trustee. Letter. The clerk drew out the process like molasses. "We've got a backlog," she said, almost kind. "But, Ms. Fletcher, I can tell you this much. The trustee Franklin named will have to be present for the transfer." "Can you tell me who it was?" I asked, bracing myself. She shook her head. "Not over the phone." I hung up and stared at Rusty's brass bottle cap tag as it winked in the winter sun. The next right thing. Keep Samuel safe, gather proof, and force a room of men who liked their mirrors to look at someone other than themselves. At home, I searched for Emily. I called her old number until the recording told me it was no longer in service. I called the dentist's office where she'd worked. They said she'd left 6 months ago. I called the call center. No record of an Emily Fletcher or an Emily Caldwell in their system. It was as if she'd melted into the cracks of the world. Samuel watched me from the kitchen table, doing homework I'd picked up from the school he'd be starting on Monday. "She does this sometimes," he said, not looking up from his math problems. "Disappears. Then comes back with stories." "What kind of stories?" I asked. He shrugged. "About jobs, about people who were going to help us, about places we could go that would be better." His pencil moved steadily across the paper. They never were. I wanted to promise him that this time would be different, that I would make it different. But I'd learned the hard way that children remember the promises you break more than the ones you keep. Instead, I said, "Tomorrow we're going to the county records office, in person." "Because of Grandpa's papers?" "Yes. And then we're going to look for your mom." He nodded, solemn. "She might not want to be found." The wisdom in those words, the way he'd learned to protect himself from hope, made me ache. "Everyone wants to be found," I said, "even when they're scared of what happens next." That night, I sat at my kitchen table after Samuel had gone to bed and spread out the contents of the black folder. The deed, the transfer document, Franklin's letter, and one more thing. A smaller envelope I hadn't noticed before, tucked into the inside pocket. My name was written on it in Franklin's precise handwriting. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a key. "Joanne, if you're reading this, 2 things have happened. I've died, and the child has found his way to you. I always knew he would. Blood finds its own, even when we try to pretend otherwise. I've named you as trustee for Samuel's inheritance, not because you're his grandmother, though that matters, but because you're the only person at Clayton who remembers what it was built for. People, not profit. The key opens a safe deposit box at First National, box 247. There's more there for the boy. And for you. Things I couldn't trust to paper alone. Take care of him. Find Emily if you can. And remember that visibility isn't something others grant you. It's something you claim by standing in your own light. Yours in trust, Franklin Caldwell. I held the letter to my chest and cried, for the years lost with Emily, for the grandson I hadn't known was sleeping under my roof, for the strange kindness of an old man who'd seen what I couldn't. Mr. Steele scheduled a mandatory vision meeting the following week. Floor leaders, supervisors, anyone he thought could nod on cue. I wasn't invited. Then suddenly I was. Every voice matters, his email lied. I knew an opening when I saw it. I told Samuel we were going to a meeting where adults like to hear themselves talk. They won't expect to hear you, I said, so you won't need to speak at all. You'll just need to be. And Rusty? He asked. Rusty too, I said. If we're crashing a party, we're crashing it with family. The boardroom smelled like copy paper and cold coffee. The wall screens showed graphs rising like obedient mountains. Mr. Steele's smile could have sliced bread. Welcome, he said grandly, to a conversation about visibility. He didn't see me until I was in the doorway with Samuel and the black folder. He didn't see Rusty tucked inside Samuel's jacket like a warm heartbeat. He didn't see the way the plant floor crew that had been summoned to take notes watched me with eyes that said finally, Ms. Fletcher, he said, his smile freezing. This is unexpected. Good, I said. Then you'll be awake. I guided Samuel to the seat beside me and placed the folder on the table. Clayton Components was stabilized 30 years ago by an investor who loved this town. He tucked that love into paper. That investor was Franklin Caldwell. I rested my palm on the folder's slick cover. Per his deed, upon his death, controlling interest doesn't pass to the current manager. It passes to his, grandchild, through the Caldwell line. A chuckle twitched in Mr. Steele's throat like an involuntary spasm. And I suppose you brought a grandchild in your purse? Not my purse, I said, and looked at Samuel. He looked back at me and nodded. Brave. He'd chosen that moment. He stood, slipped Rusty out of his jacket, and let the cat curl into his lap. Rusty blinked like a king who didn't bother to announce himself. This is Samuel Caldwell, I said quietly. And this deed says he is the heir. You can't be serious, Mr. Steele said, turning to the head of accounts like his gaze alone could make the man comply. This is a prank. Children don't inherit factories. Children inherit trauma all the time, I said. Why not safety for once? The head of accounts, a decent man named Richie who counts with his heart and his head, stood. He adjusted his glasses, slid the papers out, and nodded slowly. The documents appear to be in order. Then he squinted at the second seal, brow lifting. And this is the trustee letter. My breath snagged. He looked over his glasses at me. Ms. Fletcher, the trustee named by Mr. Caldwell, the one authorized to act in the child's interest until age is you. For a moment, every sound in the room fell away. All I could hear was the cat's low purr and the soft squeak of Samuel's thumb against the folder edge. Franklin's words in that break room years ago clicked into place like a well-cut gear. I'll repeat this for the record, Richie said, calmer now, professional. Mr. Franklin Caldwell acquired a controlling stake to stabilize the plant. He stipulated that upon his death, control passes to his grandchild, identified as Samuel, and that until majority, Joanne Fletcher is authorized as trustee to protect the asset for the child's benefit. A vice president cleared his throat. And what does control mean in practice? It means, I said, finding my voice, that decisions here must answer to more than one man's bonus. Mr. Steele's smile returned, brittle and dangerous. Even if your bedtime story is true, Ms. Fletcher, what exactly do you plan to do with control? You're a line lead. You think reading a deed makes you a CEO? No, I said. It makes me a steward. A good one knows when to ask for help, and when to say no. I turned to Samuel. This deed is yours. So are the choices it protects. I can speak for you. Until you're old enough to sign your own name to decisions. But I will not speak over you. He looked at me, serious. Can we make sure people don't get fired just to make the papers look good? We can, I said. We can start there. A rustle went around the room. Some scoffs, some surprised softness. Even in that moment, I knew we were stepping into years of work, but we were stepping into them. Together. Effective immediately, I said. We pause all layoffs. We audit safety practices. We rework schedules so a human can survive them. And we establish a worker advisory council, people from every line. We will not treat humans like interchangeable parts. Mr. Steele stood, knocking his chair. Over my dead, Richie coughed politely. Over the deed's instruction, actually. Mr. Steele, your, operational role can continue if you accept oversight. If not, your contract includes an exit clause. Silence. The kind you can taste. Samuel slid the folder closer to his chest. Rusty purred louder, like a drum that says, steady now. Mr. Steele looked around for a mirror and found none. This is a circus, he said. You'll regret this. I nodded. I regret not opening that folder sooner. That's all. He left the room without looking at me. The door closed. You could feel the air change. People started to breathe like it might be safe to again. Samuel watched him go. Is he going to be mad at me? Probably, I said. But people who need power like oxygen get mad at anyone who learns to breathe without them. He thought about that. Can Rusty come to the office? I smiled for the first time all day. Rusty can supervise morale. Later that evening, at home, Samuel and I sat on the porch swing, watching the first stars appear. Rusty prowled the yard with the dignity of a cat who knows exactly how important he is. Inside, I had piles of paperwork, legal forms I barely understood, financial statements that made my head swim, messages from board members who'd suddenly remembered my name. What happens now? Samuel asked, his shoulder warm against mine. Now we find your mom, I said, and we make the factory a place where people can work without breaking. And Mr. Steele? He'll stay as long as he's useful, and then he'll go somewhere else to be important. Samuel nodded, satisfied. And us? I looked at him, this child who'd survived abandonment and hunger and still had the courage to ask what came next. We'll be family, I said. We'll figure out the rest as we go. The next morning, I went to First National Bank with Franklin's key and a hammering heart. The safe deposit box contained 3 things. A thick envelope of cash with, for immediate needs, written on it in Franklin's precise hand. A smaller envelope addressed to Samuel for his 18th birthday. And a worn leather journal with Emily's name on the cover. I didn't open the journal, not yet. Some privacies should be approached with care, even when answers burn in your throat. Instead, I took the money. Enough to pay rent and buy groceries and clothe a growing boy, and tucked it into my bag. The journal went into my coat pocket, close to my heart. The letter for Samuel went into the black folder, a promise for his future. When I returned home, there was a message on my answering machine, a woman's voice tired and tight with worry. Mom, it's Emily. I'm in trouble. I need help. I need to know if Samuel found you. Please call this number if you get this. Please. I played it 3 times, my hands shaking. I called the number immediately, but it went to voicemail. I left a message that said simply, he's safe. He's with me. Come home. Then I sat at my kitchen table and opened Emily's journal. The first entry was dated 5 years ago. Dad came back. Says he's changed. Says he wants to help. I want to believe him, but I keep remembering how he left. Samuel likes him, though. Calls him Dad, even though Nathan hasn't sent so much as a birthday card in 3 years. I'm, trying to be fair. Maybe people do change. I flipped forward, pages of my daughter's life unfolding, jobs gained and lost, apartments that never quite felt like home. Samuel's first day of school, her pride when he brought home artwork. And then 6 months ago, Nathan says there's money. Big money. Says his grandfather is dying and there's an inheritance coming that will change everything. Says we should move to Detroit. Be ready. I don't trust him, but I'm so tired of struggling. Samuel deserves better than this. Better than counting quarters for the laundromat and wearing shoes until his toes curl. What if this is our chance? What if Nathan is right for once? My stomach tightened. I skipped ahead, scanning entries. Nathan took my savings. Said he needed it for the lawyer. Said it's an investment in our future. Grandpa Franklin died. Nathan says there's a complication with the will. Says we need to lay low for a while. We're staying in a motel outside Detroit. Nathan says we're positioning ourselves for when the money comes through. I don't know what that means. Samuel misses his school. I miss knowing the next step. The last entry was from 3 weeks ago. Nathan's gone. Took the car. Took my phone. Said he'd be back with the settlement. I don't believe him anymore. The motel wants payment. I told Samuel to stay with Mrs. Parsons next door while I look for work. I'll be back tomorrow. I'll figure something out. I always do. I closed the journal, heart racing. Emily was in trouble. Nathan had lied. About the money, about everything. And my daughter and grandson had paid the price. I called the police in Detroit, filed a missing persons report, described Emily, mentioned Nathan. They took the information politely but without urgency. Another adult gone by choice, they thought. They'd seen it before. When Samuel came home from school, I sat him down and told him the truth, that his mother was looking for him, that she hadn't abandoned him, that she was in trouble, and we were going to find her. Was it because of Dad? He asked, eyes too knowing for 10. I think so, I said, but we're going to fix it. Like we fixed the factory? I smiled at his face, at the way he said we, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like that, but maybe harder. Rusty jumped onto the couch and inserted himself between us, purring like an engine. Samuel stroked, his copper fur, thoughtful. Rusty always knows when I need him, he said. Maybe he can help find Mom too. Maybe he can, I said, and for the first time in weeks, I felt hope stir in my chest. Not the kind that comes from promises, but the kind that comes from facing the truth and deciding to fight anyway. The papers went through. County verified. The ink dried. The plant didn't turn into a fairy tale, but it turned into a place where people didn't flinch when the manager walked by. Schedules shifted, not perfectly, but humanly. Overtime became something you chose for extra money instead of something you bled for to keep your job. Safety trainings got shorter and smarter. Manny stopped waking up with his hands numb from overuse. That alone felt like a victory worth framing. Mr. Steele took his exit package and a piece of his reputation with him. The day he cleared his office, he didn't look at me. That was all right. Some men can't stand the sight of a woman who learned how to be visible without their permission. Samuel and I met with a lawyer who explained the long road ahead. Fiduciary responsibilities, quarterly reports, transparent decision-making. As trustee, I said, "You're here to protect what belongs to this child. Not just money, but meaning. What do you want this factory to be when he's grown? A place where the boy I found behind it would never have to hide," I said. We set up a scholarship tied to apprenticeships, small but honest. We started a pantry in coordination with the Clayton Food Bank, stocked by voluntary payroll contributions and matched by factory funds. The pantry cabinet sits beside the time clock where Rusty once slept. There's a small brass plaque at the base level where toddlers can read it when they learn to spell. Take what you need. Leave what you can. No questions, only care. Rusty has a bed in my office now. An old shipping crate with a cushion and a ridiculous felt mouse he pretends not to enjoy. He makes his rounds, accepting tribute in the form of chin scratches and smuggled tuna. We call him the night shift foreman. He wears the title better than most men I've seen try. As for Samuel, we found an apartment. Warm, simple, 2 windows that catch the morning. He goes to Clayton Elementary now. He likes science and cats and porches where you can listen to rain. He keeps the deed in a fireproof box because he is, despite everything, a boy who learns from what almost broke him. Sometimes he opens the box just to read the letter. He sounds like someone who wanted me to be okay, he said once, eyes soft. He was, I said. And so am I. We talk about Emily gently. We don't rush her into the room where we are learning to breathe. Healing can't be manhandled. It can only be invited. On Sundays, Samuel and I bake cornbread with honey. We set an extra plate on the table, not because we believe in ghosts, but because we believe in second chances. The door stays unlocked for the first hour, just in case. The search for Emily continued like a slow current beneath our daily routines. I filed reports, I called hospitals, I drove to Detroit on weekends and showed her picture in shelters and diners and convenience stores. Samuel would sit in the passenger seat, Rusty in a carrier in the back, both of them watching the world through windows steamed with hope and fear. "She'll find us," Samuel said once, with that quiet certainty children sometimes have. "She always does." I prayed he was right. 3 months after Samuel came to live with me, my phone rang at 2 a.m., a nurse from Detroit General. "We have an Emily Fletcher here," she said. "She was brought in with exposure and malnutrition. She had your number in her pocket." Samuel and I were in the car before dawn, Rusty protesting from his carrier. The hospital smelled like every hospital. Antiseptic and fear and the faint undertone of cafeteria coffee. Emily was in a bed by the window, thin as winter light, her eyes closed. But she was breathing. She was alive. Samuel approached the bed slowly, as if afraid a sudden movement might make her disappear. "Mom," he whispered. Her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, confusion clouded her face. Then she saw him, and her whole body seemed to exhale. "Samuel," she said, voice cracking. "You're okay." "I'm okay," he said, taking her hand. "Grandma found me." Emily's gaze shifted to me, standing in the doorway with my heart in my throat. "Mom," she said, and in that one word was every apology we'd never managed to say out loud. "I'm here," I said, moving to the bedside. "We're all here." Emily's story emerged in pieces over the next few days. Nathan had taken her to Detroit with promises of Franklin's money. When the money didn't materialize, he'd grown angry, then desperate. He'd taken their savings, their car, everything they had, left Emily stranded with promises to return that grew thinner each time. Finally, he'd disappeared completely, and Emily had been living in shelters, working temporary jobs, trying to save enough to get back to Clayton and find Samuel. "I called Mrs. Parsons every day," she said, tears streaming. "She said Samuel had left, that no one knew where he'd gone. I was so scared." "He found me," I said, squeezing her hand. "Or maybe we found each other." "At the factory," Samuel added proudly, "with Rusty." Emily looked at the cat, who had made himself comfortable at the foot of her hospital bed. "You kept him safe," she said. Rusty yawned as if to say this was obvious and hardly worth mentioning. "And Grandpa's papers?" Emily asked, hesitantly. "Nathan said there was money." "There was," I said, "but not the kind Nathan expected. Franklin left his stake in the factory to Samuel. He made me the trustee." Emily's eyes widened. "You? But I thought that we were strangers," I said softly. "Maybe to each other, but not to him. He saw what we couldn't." She nodded, tears falling freely now. "I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. For the silence, for being too proud to call. I'm sorry, too," I said, "for not finding you sooner, for not being the mother you needed." Samuel looked between us, solemn. Then he reached into his backpack and pulled out the fireproof box. "Grandpa left something for both of you," he said, opening it carefully. He handed Emily the small envelope with her name on it, the one I'd found in the safe deposit box. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a key. "The key to my house," she read aloud, voice breaking, "and a promise that there will always be room for those who want to come home." People started to ask me for things I never expected. Opinions, plans, ideas I'd long ago learned to keep small so they didn't make men nervous. I told them about adequate breaks, rotating shifts that make room for childcare, and how a factory that listens saves more money than one that punishes. "Humans are cheaper to love than to replace," I said in a meeting once, and Richie wrote it at the top of the whiteboard like a mission statement. We held a town hall in the cafeteria the first Friday after Emily came home. Folding chairs, burnt coffee, that smell of stainless steel and old announcements. Samuel stood between Emily and me, holding both our hands. Rusty wove around our legs, checking for invisible tripwires. "I want to say something," Samuel whispered. "Okay," I said, heartbeat in my throat. "You can say anything you want, or nothing." He nodded and stepped forward, small shoulders straight. The room quieted. "I used to sit behind the factory," he said, "and be cold. I didn't tell anyone because I thought I was the kind of person who doesn't get to ask. I'm not anymore." His voice didn't shake. Mine did. "You're not," I said loudly enough for the back row. "None of us are." We posted a new sign over the admin doors a week later. It doesn't have a logo. It has a promise. "We see each other here." On a Tuesday, that I felt like spring trying out its voice. A bouquet appeared on my desk. White daisies, no card. A minute later, Manny stuck his head in. "Found that envelope in the drop," he said. Inside, a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was familiar where it mattered. "Thank you for keeping paper with a spine. FC." I have no idea how that message found me or who delivered it. Maybe it was Franklin's attorney. Maybe it was just this town finding a way to say, "We remember who showed up." Emily moved into my house while she recovered. At first, we circled each other carefully, like dancers who had forgotten the steps but remembered the music. There were awkward pauses at breakfast, sentences that trailed off into old hurts, moments when we both reached for the same coffee mug and pulled back too, quickly. But there were other moments too. Emily laughing at something Samuel said, the sound so familiar it made my chest ache. The three of us watching old movies on the couch. Rusty sprawled across our laps like a copper bridge. Whispered conversations after Samuel went to bed, rebuilding our history one memory at a time. I was so angry with you, Emily said one night, fingers tracing patterns on the kitchen table. For so long. I know, I said. I was angry too. And scared. Of what? That I'd failed you. That you didn't need me anymore. She looked up, eyes shining. I always needed you, Mom. I just didn't know how to say it without feeling like I'd lost. I reached across the table and took her hand. Nobody wins in silence. Emily started working at the factory in the administrative office. It wasn't charity. She had a head for numbers that Franklin would have appreciated, and the new employee assistance program needed someone who understood what it meant to fall through the cracks. She set up childcare vouchers and emergency funds, transportation assistance, and skills training. She made sure the pantry stayed stocked and that people knew how to use it without shame. You remind me of him, I told her once, watching her sort through applications at the kitchen table. Franklin, the way you see the whole picture. She smiled, a flicker of pride warming her face. You think he knew about all of this? I thought about the deed, the trustee letter, the careful way Franklin had constructed a safety net none of us could see until we needed it. I think he knew enough. He knew what mattered. Nathan reappeared in early summer, all slick charm and practiced regret. He came to the factory asking for Emily, for Samuel, for what was rightfully his. I met him in the conference room, the same one where Samuel and I had changed everything. They're not here for you, I said simply. You can't keep my son from me, he said, voice rising. I have rights. Rights you abandoned when you left them stranded in Detroit, I replied, keeping my voice level. Rights you gambled away with every promise you broke. This is about the money, isn't it? He leaned forward, eyes narrow. Franklin's stake. That should have come to me. It never was about money for Franklin, I said. It was about care, about who would stay when staying got hard. I want to see my son, he insisted. That's not my decision to make, I said. It's Samuel's and Emily's. In the end, they did meet. In a park, with Emily and me watching from a bench nearby. Samuel approached his father with that careful dignity he carried, Rusty trotting beside him like a guardian. They talked for 10 minutes. Samuel nodded a few times, answered questions with the briefest words. Then he stood, patted Rusty's head, and walked back to us. He wants me to come live with him in Chicago, Samuel said matter-of-factly. He says he has a big apartment now. Emily tensed beside me. What do you want? She asked, voice steady. Samuel looked back at Nathan, then at us, his mother and grandmother, two women who had rebuilt family from fragments. I want to stay here, he said. This is home. Nathan left Clayton the next day. Maybe he understood finally that some things can't be claimed, only earned. Maybe he just knew when he was beaten. Either way, he signed the papers Emily's lawyer had prepared, surrendering claims to Franklin's estate, establishing visitation that could grow if Samuel wanted it, acknowledging Emily's sole custody. Was that hard? I asked Samuel later as we sat on the porch swing watching fireflies spark in the dusk. He thought about it, his face serious in the half-light. No, he said finally. Leaving Rusty would be hard. Leaving you and Mom would be hard. That was just finishing something that was already over. When the state compliance officer came by to verify the transfer of Franklin's stake, she asked me if I felt empowered. It's a strange word for a woman whose hands still smell like degreaser. No, I said. I feel employed to do the right thing. She laughed as if I'd made a joke. I didn't correct her. The following quarter, our output climbed. Not because people were scared, but because people were steady. Pride does that. Dignity does that. The CFO presented the numbers with genuine surprise and a joke about Rusty's managerial influence. Someone printed a badge for the cat that says, Supervisor, Human Contentment. He refuses to wear it. Of course he does. We held a small ceremony in the courtyard under the maple that turns dramatic in October. The workers picked the song, something with an easy chorus and a beat our boots know. We read the names of people who'd retired without fanfare in the last decade and hung a plaque for each. We cried at the right places and laughed at the rest. It wasn't a revolution. It was a homecoming. As for Mr. Steele, he sent an email from a new company in a bigger city, concluding with, no hard feelings. I didn't respond. I don't keep grudges. I keep lessons. One of them is this. Men who trade people for optics always run out of both. Emily found her footing slowly. Then all at once. She started taking night classes at the community college. Business administration, her old dream. She made friends with the women from the line, organized a weekly potluck where recipes were swapped like secrets. She learned to laugh again. Not the careful laugh she'd used with Nathan, but the full-throated one that had always belonged to her. One evening, I found her sitting on the back steps watching Samuel and Rusty chase shadows across the lawn. "Thank you," she said without looking at me, "for finding him when I couldn't." I sat beside her, our shoulders touching. "He found me," I said. "That's the thing about family. It finds its way back, even when we lose the map." She leaned her head against my shoulder, the way she used to when she was small and the world was simpler. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" I watched Samuel scoop Rusty into his arms, the cat's purr audible even from where we sat. "Yes," I said. "We already are." A year after Samuel found me behind the loading dock, Franklin's lawyer contacted us. There was one final piece of the estate, a small cabin on Lake Huron that Franklin had kept separate from his other holdings. He wanted the boy to have a place to watch the stars, the lawyer said, handing over another set of keys. He said children need horizons bigger than factory walls. The cabin was simple. 2 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, windows that caught the sunrise and held it like a promise. The first weekend we visited, Samuel ran straight to the water's edge, Rusty trotting behind with his tail high like an exclamation point. Emily and I stood on the porch watching them. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked. "A year ago, I mean." I shook my head. "I was just trying to stay visible." "You were always visible, Mom," she said softly. "I just wasn't looking in the right direction." We spent summers at the cabin and weekends when the weather allowed. Samuel learned to fish from old Pete, who lived in the cabin next door, and told stories about Franklin as a young man. How he'd worked 3 jobs to buy his first share in the factory. How he'd once jumped into the lake in December to save a stranger's dog. How he'd kept photos of his family in his wallet even when they weren't speaking to him. "Your grandfather," Pete told Samuel, "knew the value of things that can't be counted." The plant continued to change, not all at once, but in steady increments. We established a profit-sharing program for long-term employees. We partnered with the high school for internships that paid actual wages. We built a daycare center in the unused administrative wing where the sound of children laughing mixed with the rhythm of the machinery in a way that felt right. Richie, the head of accounting who had confirmed Franklin's deed that day in the boardroom, became the new plant manager. He wasn't flashy or intimidating, but he knew every employee's name and remembered to ask about their families. Under his leadership, efficiency improved not through fear, but through innovation and collaboration. "Turns out," he told me once, "people work better when they're treated like people." Who knew? I smiled. Franklin knew. As Samuel grew, so did his understanding of what his grandfather had left him. Not just a stake in a factory or a cabin by a lake, but a legacy of care that demanded to be continued. He started a club at school collecting supplies for children in foster care, backpacks filled with essentials and a small stuffed animal in each one. "So they have something that's just theirs," he explained. Emily met David at a community college fundraiser, a quiet man who taught history and kept bees as a hobby. Their courtship was slow and deliberate, built on honest conversations and shared silences. When he proposed, he did it on our porch with Samuel's blessing already secured. "I've never been much for grand gestures," he told Emily, "but I'm good at staying." The wedding was small, family, close friends, workers from the factory who had become more than colleagues. Rusty served as ring bearer, a blue satin ribbon around his neck that he tolerated with feline disdain. Samuel stood beside his mother, tall and solemn in his first suit. I watched them exchange vows and felt something long knotted inside me finally release. This was what Franklin had protected with his papers and plans. Not wealth or control, but the possibility of joy. David moved into our house, adding his books and quiet habits to our routines. He built shelves in every room and listened to Samuel's stories with genuine interest. He made space for our history without trying to rewrite it. At night, I would hear the murmur of his and Emily's voices from their room, the gentle cadence of 2 people building a language. Together, the black folder found a permanent home in the fireproof safe we installed in the study. Samuel would take it out sometimes, read his grandfather's letter, trace the embossed seal with his finger. "Do you think he knew?" he asked me once. "How everything would turn out?" "No," I said honestly. "I think he just knew that people matter more than profit. The rest was up to us." I remained trustee of Samuel's stake in the factory, but as he grew, I included him in more decisions. We would sit at the kitchen table reviewing proposals and reports, teaching him to look beyond numbers to the lives they represented. Always ask who benefits, I told him, and who pays the cost. Rusty grew old with the dignity only cats can manage. His fur faded to a paler copper streaked with silver, but his purr remained as steady as a heartbeat. He slept more now, usually in patches of sunlight or on Samuel's bed, but he still made his rounds at the factory when we brought him, accepting tribute from workers who considered him their good luck charm. On the 5th anniversary of the day, Samuel and I walked into the boardroom with Franklin's deed. The town of Clayton held a community picnic in the park behind the factory. Tables stretched across the grass, laden with casseroles and pies. Children raced between trees strung with lights. Workers and their families, past and present, gathered to celebrate not just the factory's survival, but its transformation. The mayor gave a speech about economic resilience and community spirit. Richie spoke about ethical business practices and sustainable growth. But the loudest applause came when Samuel stepped up to the microphone, Rusty cradled in his arms. 5 years ago, he said, his voice deeper now but still carrying that thoughtful clarity, I was hiding behind this factory because I had nowhere else to go. Today, I'm standing in front of it because it helped give me a home. My grandfather believed that businesses should serve people, not the other way around. I'm proud to continue that belief. Emily squeezed my hand as we watched him, tears streaming unchecked down her face. David stood on her other side, his arm around her waist. Around us, the factory workers who had become our extended family nodded and clapped and called out Samuel's name. Later, as twilight softened the edges of the day, Samuel found me sitting on a bench at the edge of the celebration. He sat beside me, his shoulder now level with mine. Rusty stretched across both our laps, purring his contentment. Grandma, he said, using the name that had become as natural as breathing. There's something I've been thinking about. What's that? When I'm old enough to take over the trust, I want to expand what we've done. Not just make the factory better, but help other businesses do the same. Create a network or something. I smiled, recognizing Franklin's vision echoed in his grandson's voice. I think that's exactly what he would have wanted. He called it paper with a spine, Samuel said, stroking Rusty's faded copper fur. But it wasn't really the paper that had the spine, was it? No, I said softly. It was the people who carried it. As night fell completely, lights twinkled across the park like earthbound stars. Emily and David danced to music played by a local band. Factory workers shared stories and laughter. Children chased fireflies, their voices rising and falling like waves. I looked at Samuel, no longer the hungry boy I'd found behind the loading dock, but a young man growing into his grandfather's legacy and his own purpose. I thought about visibility, how it isn't granted by others but claimed through the quiet persistence of showing up day after day for the things and people that matter. Are you happy, Grandma? Samuel asked, the question simple and profound. I watched my daughter dancing in the arms of a good man. I felt the weight of my grandson beside me and the warmth of a cat who had helped save us all in his own feline way. I thought about the factory behind us, transformed from a place of fear to a place of possibility. Yes, I said, I am. On the first day of summer break a few weeks later, Samuel asked if we could visit the loading dock. Just to see, he said. We stood there in the late afternoon, light catching the dust motes like confetti. The spot where I first found him looked smaller somehow. He petted Rusty and whispered something that sounded like thank you to the air, or the concrete, or the part of himself that had kept going. You ready? I asked. He nodded. Ready to go home? We walked back inside, the three of us and a cat who had defended his pack with a purr, and the door swung open like it had been waiting. I was told I was invisible, but visibility isn't granted by people who profit from your silence. It's claimed by showing up for the person who needs you most. Sometimes the child behind a factory, sometimes the woman in your own skin. The boss who mocked my value now answers to a paper trail he never bothered to see, and the boy who had no bed now holds the deed to his future. The factory didn't just change hands. It found its heart. Power. Borrowed through cruelty vanishes. Power earned through care endures.